Brett Robinson thought it would be poetic justice. He wanted his pregnant black ex-wife, the nobody singer who ruined his perfect life, to stand on that stage at his wedding, visibly carrying his child while he celebrated beside his glamorous new bride. He imagined her trembling under the weight of his high society guests' judgment, reduced to entertainment while he showcased his triumph. But when Jeannie Grant opened her mouth to sing, what came out wasn't submission. It was a reckoning. And within 5 minutes, Brett's picture-perfect wedding exploded into the most public downfall Atlanta had ever witnessed. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Lagos, London, maybe New York or Kingston? We want to know. Somewhere in Atlanta, a city of wealth, ambition, and carefully maintained appearances, there lived a man named Brett Robinson. He was 34 years old, a successful entrepreneur who owned one of the most sought-after luxury events companies in the Southeast. Everyone in Atlanta's elite circles knew Brett Robinson. He was the golden boy who turned weddings into magazine-worthy spectacles, the charming businessman whose smile could close million-dollar deals, the man whose burgundy suits and confident swagger made him impossible to ignore. Brett lived the life others envied. He drove a sleek black Range Rover that gleamed under city lights. His Buckhead loft had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline, decorated with modern art and furniture that cost more than most people's cars. He moved through the world like someone who had never been told no, his chin always lifted, his gaze always assessing who could be useful to him and who could be discarded. He was handsome in that polished, calculated way, sharp jawline, perfectly groomed beard, eyes that could appear warm when it benefited him. But his attractiveness was cold, rehearsed. Everything about Brett Robinson was a performance designed to project success, power, and control. Image was everything. Reputation was currency. And love? Love was just another transaction. But there was something missing in Brett's carefully constructed world, something he had discarded like yesterday's trash 8 months ago when it became inconvenient. Her name was Jeannie Grant. Jeannie Grant was everything Brett pretended not to need. Where he was calculating, she was authentic. Where he measured people by their bank accounts, she measured them by their hearts. Where he saw the world as a stage for his ego, she saw it as a place to pour out her soul through music. Jeannie was a jazz singer with a voice that could silence a room. Not because it was technically flawless like the auto-tuned performers on the radio. No, Jeannie's voice was powerful because it was real. When she sang, you felt every note in your chest. Her joy became your joy. Her pain became your pain. It was as if her spirit poured directly through the music and wrapped itself around everyone listening. She had that rare gift, the ability to make strangers feel seen, understood, and less alone. At 28 years old, Jeannie had warm brown eyes that crinkled when she smiled, natural hair she wore in protective styles, and a quiet grace that commanded attention without demanding it. She wasn't wealthy. She didn't carry designer handbags or wear clothes with luxury labels. Jeannie lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in southwest Atlanta, where the rent was affordable and the neighbors actually knew each other's names. Her furniture was second-hand but spotless. Her walls held family photos and her grandmother's handwritten recipe cards. Somehow, her small home radiated more warmth than Brett's expensive loft ever had. Right now, on this humid October evening, Jeannie sat on her worn sofa, with both hands resting on her swollen belly. She was 7 months pregnant, and her baby kicked constantly, strong, insistent reminders of the life growing inside her. Sometimes Jeannie would close her eyes and talk softly to her unborn child. "We're going to be okay, baby," she whispered, her hands making gentle circles over her belly. "Mama's going to figure this out. I promise you, sweet one, we're going to be just fine." But even as she spoke these words, Jeannie felt the weight of fear pressing down on her chest. Money was running dangerously low. The singing gigs at small jazz lounges and private events barely covered her rent. She was 3 weeks behind on her utilities. Her refrigerator held half a gallon of milk, some eggs, a loaf of bread, and not much else. And soon, very soon, there would be a baby who needed everything: diapers, formula if she couldn't breastfeed, clothes, a safe crib, medical bills. Jeannie tried not to think about Brett. She tried not to remember the look of disgust on his face when she'd told him about the pregnancy, tried not to hear his cold voice saying, "A baby doesn't fit into my plans. You're not the right image for my future." Tried not to feel the sting of him filing divorce papers before she could even process what was happening. A knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "It's me, girl," came a bright, familiar voice. Jeannie smiled despite everything. That was Amira, her best friend since college. Amira burst through the door carrying 2 grocery bags and wearing her signature colorful head wrap and infectious grin. She worked at a nonprofit downtown, and though she didn't have much money herself, she always found ways to help Jeannie. "Amira, you didn't have to bring food again," Jeannie said, though gratitude flooded her voice. "Please, sis," Amira said, setting the bags on the small kitchen counter. "You're growing my future niece or nephew in there. Besides, what are soul sisters for if not making sure you're fed?" Amira unpacked fresh vegetables, chicken, rice, and fruit. Jeannie's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Jeannie whispered. Amira pulled her into a careful hug. "You're never going to have to find out, you hear me? We're family." 2 days later, Jeannie's phone rang while she was folding her laundry in the apartment's cramped living room. She didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway. "Hello, is this Jeannie Grant, the jazz vocalist?" A woman's voice, professional, crisp, businesslike. "Yes, this is she." "Wonderful. My name is Melissa Clark. I'm an events coordinator for high-end weddings and corporate functions here in Atlanta. I've heard exceptional things about your voice, and I have a lucrative opportunity for you." Jeannie's heart started racing. High-end weddings meant serious money. "I'm listening," Jeannie said carefully. "I'm coordinating a luxury wedding at the Grand Monarch Ballroom next month. It's going to be quite the affair. 300 guests, live orchestra, celebrity chef, full press coverage. The couple specifically requested a solo vocalist with real soul to perform during the ceremony and reception. The compensation is $3,000 for the evening." Jeannie nearly dropped the phone. $3,000. That was more than she'd made in the past 4 months combined. With that money, she could catch up on all her bills, buy everything the baby needed, and still have savings left over. That's very generous," Jeannie said, her voice shaking with hope. "Yes, I'm absolutely interested." "Excellent. I'll email you all the details: venue information, dress code, song selections, and timing. The wedding is November 15th. Does that date work for you?" "Yes, definitely yes." They discussed logistics for a few more minutes before ending the call. Jeannie sat down heavily on her couch, barely able to believe her luck. This was it. This was the miracle she'd been praying for. Finally, after months of struggle, something good was happening. The email arrived 30 minutes later. Jeannie opened it eagerly on her old laptop, ready to learn about this wonderful opportunity. And then her entire world stopped. Wedding performance contract. Event: the marriage celebration of Mr. Brett Robinson and Miss Alice Grant. Date: November 15th. Venue: Grand Monarch Ballroom. Jeannie stared at the screen, her hands frozen over the keyboard. She read the names again, and again, and again. Brett Robinson and Alice Grant. Brett, her ex-husband, the father of her unborn child, the man who had abandoned her when she needed him most. He was getting married, and somehow, impossibly, cruelly, she had been hired to sing at his wedding. Jeannie didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with questions and memories she'd tried so hard to bury. Her baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her mother's turmoil. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Brett's name on that contract. Every time she tried to breathe, the weight of humiliation pressed against her chest. By the time dawn broke through her thin curtains, Jeannie had made a decision. She would say no. She would reject this job, no matter how desperately she needed the money. She still had some dignity left, didn't she? She wouldn't give Brett the satisfaction of watching her perform at his wedding like some hired entertainment while her heart shattered all over again. She picked up her phone to type a rejection email to Melissa. But then she looked around her apartment, at the stack of overdue bills on the kitchen counter, at the empty corner where a crib should be, at the notice from her landlord warning that one more late rent payment could mean eviction. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, where her baby was growing, her little one who didn't ask to be born into poverty. Could she really afford to say no? $3,000 wasn't just money. It was survival. It was diapers and baby clothes and rent and food. It was the difference between having a home and being homeless when her baby arrived. Jeannie sat down heavily, tears streaming down her face. She felt trapped between her dignity and her desperation, between her pride and her baby's needs. What kind of choice was this? A knock on the door interrupted her spiral. "Jeannie, girl, open up. I brought breakfast." Amira. Jeannie opened the door to find her best friend holding a bag of bagels and 2 cups of coffee. Decaf for Jeannie. Amira took one look at Jeannie's tear-stained face and immediately set everything down. "What happened?" Amira asked, pulling Jeannie into a gentle hug. Jeannie told her everything, about the job offer, the life-changing money, and the devastating truth that it was Brett's wedding. When she finished, Amira was quiet for a long moment, her jaw tight with anger. Then she said something Jeannie didn't expect. "You should do it." Jeannie pulled back, staring at her friend in shock. "What? Amira, how can you say that? He abandoned me. He threw me away like I was nothing. And now he wants me to sing at his wedding? It's cruel." "Only if you let it be," Amira said firmly. She took Jeannie's hands in hers, her eyes fierce and loving. "Listen to me, sis. Brett thinks he has power over you. He thinks hiring you for his wedding will make you look small and him look big. He thinks you'll stand up there feeling ashamed and broken while he looks like a king." "Exactly," Jeannie said bitterly. "That's exactly why I can't do it." "But what if you flip the script?" Amira continued. "What if you take his trap and turn it into your triumph? You need that money desperately, Jeannie. Your baby needs that money. Why should you lose $3,000 just to protect Brett's little game?" Jeannie wiped her eyes. "I don't understand." "I'm saying go to that wedding, take that money, but don't go there as Brett's victim. Go there as Jeannie Grant, a talented singer who's doing a professional job. You're not singing for him. You're singing for yourself and for your baby. You're singing because you're a survivor." "But everyone will stare at me," Jeannie whispered. "They'll whisper. They'll know I'm the ex-wife he threw away." "Let them whisper," Amira said with fire in her voice. "Let them stare, because at the end of that night, you'll walk out of there with $3,000 and your head held high. And Brett will have to watch you stand on that stage, strong and beautiful and unbroken. He'll realize that he didn't destroy you. He'll realize you're better than he ever deserved." Jeannie looked at her friend, seeing the fierce loyalty in Amira's eyes. "You really think I can do this?" "I know you can," Amira said. "You're one of the strongest people I know. You've survived heartbreak, poverty, and carrying a baby all alone. Singing at a wedding? That's nothing compared to what you've already survived." As Amira's words settled over her, Jeannie's mind drifted back to how it all began. Back when Brett Robinson wasn't a symbol of betrayal, but a man who'd made her believe in possibilities. 15 months earlier, downtown Atlanta. The Blue Note Lounge. Jeannie had been singing at the small jazz club 3 nights a week, her voice floating over intimate tables of couples and music lovers. She remembered that night so clearly, how she'd closed her eyes during the final verse of At Last, pouring every ounce of longing and hope into the lyrics. When she opened her eyes, there was Brett, sitting alone at a corner table, staring at her like she was the only person in the room. After her set, he'd approached with champagne and that devastating smile. "You have the most incredible voice I've ever heard. It's raw, honest. It makes you feel things." She'd been flattered, but cautious. Men like Brett, polished, wealthy, confident, didn't usually notice women like her. But he kept coming back, night after night, always sitting at the same table, always watching her with that intense focus. Their romance had been a whirlwind. Brett wined and dined her at restaurants she couldn't pronounce. He told her she was his muse, his inspiration. He promised to feature her at his company's events, to introduce her to producers, to help her record an album. "You're too talented to be hidden in small clubs," he'd said. "I'm going to help you shine." She'd fallen hard and fast. 6 months later, they were married at a simple courthouse ceremony. Brett said he couldn't wait for a big wedding. He needed her to be his wife immediately. For a while, it was beautiful. But slowly, Jeannie started noticing the cracks. How Brett would introduce her as his wife, but never mention her singing. How he'd discourage her from performing at lowbrow venues because it didn't fit his image. How he'd suggest she dress differently, speak differently, be different. Then came the pregnancy. Unplanned but not unwanted, at least not by Jeannie. She'd told him with joy and hope, expecting him to share her excitement. Instead, Brett's face had gone cold. "This isn't the right time, Jeannie. A baby doesn't fit into my plans right now. We're not ready for this." "What do you mean?" she'd asked, confusion turning to dread. "I mean, you're not the right image for where I'm heading. My company is about to go national. I need a partner who understands high society, who comes from the right background. I'm sorry, but a pregnant jazz singer from Southwest Atlanta isn't what my investors want to see." The words had cut like glass. Before she could process the betrayal, Brett had already contacted a lawyer. The divorce papers were delivered 2 weeks later. The memory still burned. But sitting with Amira now, Jeannie felt something shift inside her. Maybe her friend was right. Maybe she didn't have to be Brett's victim anymore. That afternoon, Jeannie opened her laptop and sent the acceptance email to Melissa Clark. Her fingers trembled as she hit send, but she did it. That night, after Amira left, Jeannie sat at her old keyboard, her grandmother's gift, the one constant companion through every high and low of her life. She let her fingers find the keys, and a melody emerged, haunting, beautiful, painful. Then came the words, flowing like they'd been waiting inside her all along. "You left your truth to chase your crown, but love stayed when you let me down." Jeannie's voice cracked as she sang, tears rolling down her cheeks. But she kept going, the song pouring out of her like a wound finally allowed to bleed clean. She didn't plan to perform this song at Brett's wedding. She was supposed to sing traditional love songs, safe, romantic, meaningless. But as she worked on the lyrics late into the night, something inside her whispered that this song was meant for more than just her healing. This song had power. Truth had power. And Jeannie Grant was about to remember just how powerful her voice could be. The Grand Monarch Ballroom looked like something out of a dream, or a nightmare, depending on who you were. Jeannie stood in the marble-floored lobby, her hand instinctively moving to rest on her belly as she took in the opulence surrounding her. Massive gold chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, each one dripping with crystals that caught the afternoon light and scattered it in rainbow prisms across the walls. White orchids in towering arrangements perfumed the air with their delicate scent. Every surface gleamed, polished marble, gilded mirrors, brass fixtures that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. This was Brett's world, a world of excess and image, where everything sparkled, but nothing felt warm. Jeannie smoothed down the front of her mustard yellow dress, the one she wore to every performance because it made her feel like sunlight on her darkest days. The flowing fabric accommodated her 7-month belly gracefully, and she'd pulled her hair back into an elegant bun. She'd applied just enough makeup to look polished, but not like she was trying too hard. Her grandmother's pearl earrings, her only real jewelry, caught the light as she walked. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "Professional, calm, strong." The ballroom doors opened before her, and Jeannie stepped inside. The room was breathtaking. 30-foot ceilings stretched overhead, supported by marble columns wrapped in white silk and gold ribbon. More chandeliers, even larger than those in the lobby, cast a warm, romantic glow over hundreds of white chairs arranged in perfect rows. A stage stood at the front, complete with a grand piano and a microphone stand. Everywhere she looked, there were flowers, roses, peonies, hydrangeas, orchids, creating a garden of white and cream. And standing near the stage, laughing with a wedding planner and reviewing something on an iPad, was Brett Robinson. Jeannie's breath caught. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, handsome, perfectly put together in a burgundy tuxedo that probably cost thousands of dollars. His beard was precisely trimmed, his hair styled with that casual perfection that took an hour to achieve. He wore a gold watch that glinted as he gestured, mid-conversation, looking completely at ease in this palace he'd created. He looked like a man who had everything he wanted, like a man with no regrets and no conscience. Then Brett turned and saw her. For just a fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, something flickered across his face. Surprise? Guilt? Recognition? Jeannie couldn't tell. But just as quickly, his expression smoothed into a mask of cool indifference. The laughter died in the room. The wedding planner stopped mid-sentence. Even the florist arranging orchids on a nearby table paused to look. "Ah," Brett said, his voice carrying across the ballroom with deliberate casualness. "The entertainment has arrived." The entertainment. Not Jeannie, not even the singer. The entertainment. The words landed like a slap, but Jeannie had practiced for this moment. She lifted her chin, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the stage with steady, measured steps. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with a confidence she didn't entirely feel, but refused not to project. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice calm and professional. "I'm Jeannie Grant, the vocalist for your ceremony." Brett's eyes flickered down to her pregnant belly, then quickly away, as if the sight made him uncomfortable. "Yes, we've heard good things about your voice. Melissa speaks very highly of you." He paused, then added with a cold smirk, "I'm glad you could make it. I figured you could use the money." The cruelty in those words, masked as generosity, made Jeannie's hands clench at her sides, but she swallowed the sting and kept her face neutral. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Robinson," she said, emphasizing the formal address. If he could pretend they were strangers, so could she. Something flashed in Brett's eyes. Annoyance, maybe, or discomfort. But before he could respond, a voice called from across the ballroom. "Brett, darling, the florist is asking about the centerpiece heights." "Oh." A woman glided toward them, and Jeannie knew immediately this was Alice Grant. Alice was stunning in that effortless way that came from generations of wealth and privilege. She had luminous skin, perfectly highlighted hair that fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and the kind of elegant posture that suggested years of deportment classes. Her casual rehearsal outfit, cream silk blouse and tailored slacks, probably cost more than Jeannie's entire wardrobe. Diamond studs sparkled at her ears. But it was her face that struck Jeannie most. Despite all the polish and perfection, there was something gentle in Alice's expression. Something genuinely kind. Alice stopped when she saw Jeannie, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the pregnant woman in the glowing yellow dress. A small frown appeared on her flawless face, not unkind, but uncertain. "And who is this?" Alice asked, though her tone suggested curiosity rather than dismissal. "This is the singer," Brett said quickly, his voice tight. "Jeannie Grant. She'll be performing during the ceremony." Alice's eyes swept over Jeannie, taking in the belly, the modest dress, the obvious difference in their worlds. But when Alice met Jeannie's gaze, there was no judgment there, only a flicker of something else, curiosity, concern. "It's lovely to meet you," Alice said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm but gentle. "I've been looking forward to hearing you. Melissa said you have an extraordinary voice." "Thank you," Jeannie said, surprised by the warmth in Alice's greeting. "I'm honored to be part of your special day." Alice studied Jeannie for a moment longer, and Jeannie could see her noticing things. The tension radiating from Brett, the way Jeannie held herself with quiet dignity, despite the obvious disparity between them, the protective way Jeannie's hand rested on her belly. "Shall we begin the sound check?" Melissa, the wedding planner, interjected with professional cheer. "We're running a bit behind schedule." For the next 30 minutes, Jeannie sang through the traditional wedding songs on the approved list. Ave Maria, the wedding song. At last, her voice filled the enormous ballroom, rich and pure and achingly beautiful. The acoustics were perfect, carrying every note to the highest corners of the vaulted ceiling. Jeannie closed her eyes and let the music flow through her. forgetting for brief moments where she was and why. When she opened her eyes at last, she found Alice watching her with glistening eyes, clearly moved. Even the wedding planner and florist had stopped working to listen. Brett stood at the back of the ballroom, arms crossed, his face unreadable. But Jeannie noticed he couldn't quite meet her gaze. Every time their eyes threatened to connect, he looked away. Good, Jeannie thought. Let him be uncomfortable. Let him remember what he threw away. When she finished the final song, there was a moment of profound silence. Then Melissa began clapping enthusiastically. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. You're going to be perfect for the ceremony. Alice wiped at the corner of her eye discreetly. That was truly beautiful, she said softly. You don't just sing the words, you feel them. Thank you, Jeannie said. Music is how I process the world. Brett walked toward them, his expression controlled. Your voice is still good, he said quietly, just loud enough for Jeannie to hear. I'm glad you're able to work. I'm sure you need the money. The cruelty disguised as concern made Jeannie's jaw tighten. But she smiled sweetly and responded just as quietly. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Robinson. I'm very grateful. She emphasized Mr. Robinson again, making it crystal clear she was treating him as nothing more than a client, a stranger, someone who meant nothing to her. Brett's eyes flashed with something, annoyance, hurt, but he turned away without another word. As people began dispersing to discuss other wedding details, Jeannie gathered her sheet music and headed toward the exit. Her heart was pounding, exhaustion washing over her, but she'd done it. She'd survived seeing Brett without falling apart. She was almost to the ballroom doors when she heard footsteps behind her. Excuse me? Miss Grant? Jeannie turned to find Alice standing there alone, having separated from Brett and the wedding planner. Up close, Jeannie could see fine worry lines around Alice's eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Despite all her beauty and elegance, Alice looked tired, uncertain. Yes, Jeannie said carefully. Alice hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. Your voice really is remarkable. Where did you train? I didn't go to a conservatory, if that's what you're asking, Jeannie said, trying not to sound defensive. I learned from my grandmother and from singing in church. I wasn't trying to insult you, Alice said quickly, her voice surprisingly gentle. I genuinely meant it as a compliment. There's something in your voice, something authentic that trained singers sometimes lose. You sing like you've lived every lyric. Jeannie didn't know what to say to that. She simply nodded. Alice glanced back toward the ballroom, where Brett's voice could be heard giving instructions about something. When she turned back to Jeannie, her perfect composure had cracked, just slightly. Can I ask you something? Alice said quietly. And please be honest. Jeannie's heart started racing. Okay. Alice's carefully maintained mask slipped, revealing genuine vulnerability underneath. Do you think Brett is a good man? The question hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Jeannie stared at Alice, completely shocked. This woman, this beautiful, wealthy, seemingly perfect woman, was asking the ex-wife she didn't know existed whether the man she was about to marry was good. The first crack in Alice's perfect illusion had just appeared, and Jeannie suddenly realized she held the power to widen it, or to stay silent and let Alice walk blindly into the same trap she once had. The question Alice asked still echoed in Jeannie's mind as she stood frozen in that opulent hallway. Do you think Brett is a good man? Jeannie's throat tightened. 1,000 truths fought to break free, truths about abandonment, cruelty, and a man who measured people's worth by their usefulness to his image. But looking at Alice's vulnerable face, Jeannie also saw the weight of doubt the other woman was already carrying. Whatever answer Jeannie gave would shatter something. Before she could respond, Brett's voice called from inside the ballroom. Alice, darling, the photographer needs to speak with you. The moment broke. Alice's mask slipped back into place, perfect and unreadable. I should go, Alice said quietly, but her eyes lingered on Jeannie's face, searching for an answer she was afraid to hear. Jeannie simply nodded, and Alice walked away, her heels clicking against marble with the sound of a woman walking toward a fate she couldn't quite see. Across town that evening, in the private room of an upscale steakhouse, Brett Robinson sat surrounded by his groomsmen, 6 men in expensive suits, laughing over whiskey and cigars. The room reeked of wealth and masculine bravado. "I still can't believe you hired her," Marcus said, shaking his head. He'd been Brett's college roommate, and the only one who knew about Jeannie and the pregnancy. "Man, that's cold even for you." Brett swirled his glass of 20-year-old scotch and smiled. "Cold? I'm being generous. She needed work, didn't she? I'm giving her $3,000. That's more than she'd make in 6 months singing at dive bars." "But you know it's going to hurt her," Marcus pressed. "Singing at your wedding while she's pregnant with your—" "That's not my kid!" Brett cut him off sharply, his jaw tightening. "I made my position clear. I offered her money to handle the situation, and she chose not to. Her choice, her consequences." Another groomsman, Tyler, laughed and clinked his glass against Brett's. "I respect the power move, honestly. Shows you've completely moved on. No attachment, no weakness." "Exactly," Brett said, warming to his audience. "This is about sending a message, to her, to everyone. Brett Robinson doesn't get dragged down by poor decisions. I had a momentary lapse in judgment with that woman, but look at me now." He gestured expansively. "Marrying into the Grant family. Alice is everything I need, connected, sophisticated, an asset to my brand." "And she's gorgeous," Tyler added with a smirk. "That too," Brett agreed, though his voice carried no real warmth. "The point is, having Jeannie sing at my wedding proves who really won. She'll stand on that stage like a paid servant, entertaining my guests while I celebrate my real future. That's justice." Marcus looked at his friend with something like disappointment. "You used to be different, man. You used to actually care about people." Brett's expression hardened. "I grew up. I realized that in this world sentiment is weakness. You either rise to the top or get left behind. Jeannie was holding me back. No connections, no status, no understanding of my world. She had to go." "And the baby?" Marcus asked quietly. "Not my problem," Brett said coldly. "I'm not on that birth certificate. Legally, financially, emotionally, I'm free. And in 3 weeks when she sings at my wedding, everyone will see just how free I am." The groomsmen raised their glasses in a toast that felt more like a eulogy for Brett's humanity. That same evening, Alice Grant sat in the bedroom of her family's estate, staring at her phone. Brett had left hours ago for his bachelor dinner, kissing her cheek with his usual practiced affection before departing. Something had felt off since the rehearsal. Since she'd seen that pregnant singer, Jeannie, and noticed the way tension crackled in the air between her and Brett, the way Brett couldn't meet the woman's eyes, the way Jeannie had called him Mr. Robinson with such pointed formality. Alice wasn't naive. She'd grown up in a world where appearances mattered more than truth, where everyone wore masks. But lately, she'd been seeing cracks in Brett's mask, small things that didn't quite add up. Earlier that day, she'd walked into the study and found Brett hunched over his phone, frantically deleting messages. When he'd noticed her, he'd closed the app so quickly he nearly dropped the device. "Work drama," he'd said with an easy smile. "Client complaints, nothing you need to worry about." But Alice had seen his face in that unguarded moment. Guilt, panic, something dark. Now, sitting alone in her room, Alice heard Brett's voice drifting up from the terrace below. He must have returned while she was upstairs. She moved to the window and saw him pacing, phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, she'll be there," Brett was saying, his voice carrying on the night breeze. "Don't worry, I planned this myself. She needs the money too badly to back out now." A pause. Then Brett laughed, a cold, calculating sound Alice had never heard from him before. "Trust me, it's perfect. She'll sing, I'll prove I've moved on, and everyone will see I made the right choice. It's poetic?" "Really?" Alice's hand pressed against the window frame. Who was he talking about? The singer? Jeannie? But why would Brett need to plan? The realization hit like ice water. This wasn't a coincidence. Brett had deliberately hired that pregnant woman. But why? What was their connection? Alice's mind raced back to the rehearsal, to Jeannie's protective hand on her belly, to the way Brett had avoided looking directly at her, to the question that had burst from Alice's lips before she could stop it. "Is Brett a good man?" She'd asked a stranger that question. Asked because somewhere deep inside, Alice already knew the answer. She just hadn't wanted to admit it. Across the city, in her small apartment, Jeannie sat at her grandmother's old keyboard, unable to sleep. Her baby kicked constantly, restless and strong, as if the child could sense its mother's turmoil. Jeannie's fingers found the keys, and the melody emerged. The song she'd been writing, the one that felt like bleeding her soul onto sheet music. She'd worked on it every night since accepting the wedding job, refining it, perfecting it, pouring every ounce of her pain and strength into the lyrics. "You left your truth to chase your crown, but love stayed when you let me down. You wanted gold, you wanted fame, but threw away what had no price. A heart that loved you without shame, a love that needed no disguise." Her voice cracked on the last line, tears streaming down her face, but she kept going. The second verse had evolved over the past weeks, becoming something more powerful. "You left your child and called it freedom, but love stayed, in me and in him. You built your world on lies and pride, but truth sings louder than your name. You thought you won, but love survived, and I'm still standing all the same." Jeannie's hands trembled on the keys. This song wasn't on the approved list. She was supposed to sing safe, traditional wedding songs. Ave Maria, At Last, romantic melodies that would make guests smile, and Alice cry happy tears. She had no intention of performing this song at Brett's wedding. It was just for her, a way to process her grief, to reclaim her voice, to remind herself that she was more than what Brett had tried to reduce her to. But as she played through it again, something shifted. The melody grew stronger, more insistent. The lyrics demanded to be heard, not whispered in her apartment, but declared, witnessed, known. "No," Jeannie whispered to the empty room. "I can't. I need that money. I need this job." Yet the song wouldn't leave her alone. It played in her mind when she tried to sleep. It hummed beneath her skin when she moved through her day. It whispered in her baby's kicks, in her heartbeat, in the very breath that filled her lungs. This song wanted to live. It demanded to be born. Jeannie closed the keyboard cover and sat back, exhausted. She had 11 days until the wedding, 11 days to decide whether she would play it safe and take her money, or whether she would risk everything to sing her truth. She didn't know yet which choice she would make. But the song, raw, honest, and powerful, was ready, waiting, like a storm gathering strength before it broke. November 15th arrived with the kind of perfect weather that made people believe in destiny. Golden sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of the Grand Monarch Ballroom, painting everything in warm amber and rose. The air smelled of gardenias, champagne, and expensive perfume. Outside, a red carpet stretched from the street to the hotel entrance, flanked by velvet ropes and photographers jostling for position. News vans from local stations had parked along Peachtree Street. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a spectacle, a statement, Atlanta's social event of the year. Inside the ballroom, 300 guests settled into their seats like jewels arranged in a display case. Women wore silk gowns in emerald, sapphire, and ruby tones, their necks dripping with diamonds that caught the chandelier light. Men adjusted cufflinks on custom tuxedos, checking their Rolexes and exchanging business cards even now. These were Atlanta's elite. Tech moguls, real estate developers, socialites whose family names appeared on hospital wings and museum galleries. Everyone who mattered was here to witness Brett Robinson marry into the Grant family fortune. Jeannie stood in the service corridor behind the ballroom, pressed against the wall, trying to make herself invisible. She'd arrived through the staff entrance 45 minutes ago, slipping past catering teams carrying silver trays and florists, making last-minute adjustments to the towering rose arrangements. No one questioned her presence. In her flowing midnight blue dress, the one Melissa had sent, she looked elegant enough to belong but plain enough to be overlooked. Just another vendor, just the entertainment. Her hands trembled as she clutched her folder of sheet music. Inside were the traditional love songs Melissa had approved, safe, romantic, meaningless, and beneath those, hidden like a secret, the handwritten lyrics to Love Stayed. Jeannie touched her belly, feeling her baby's restless movements. 7 months pregnant, and her little one seemed to sense her anxiety, kicking and turning as if trying to communicate something urgent. "I know, baby," she whispered. "I know you feel it too." Through the partially open door, she could see straight into the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead like constellations. White orchids spilled from marble columns. A string quartet played Vivaldi near the altar, where a minister in formal robes waited with a leather-bound Bible. And there, near the front row, stood Brett Robinson. Jeannie's breath caught. He looked magnificent in his burgundy tuxedo, perfectly tailored, impossibly confident, laughing at something one of his groomsmen said. His beard was trimmed to precision. His gold cufflinks gleamed. He moved through the crowd like a king greeting his court, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, basking in the admiration that surrounded him like cologne. He looked like a man who'd won every game he'd ever played. Jeannie felt her resolve crack. What was she doing here? How had she convinced herself she could stand on that stage and sing while Brett celebrated everything he'd chosen instead of her? While he proved to 300 witnesses that discarding her had been the right decision? Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, to the life Brett refused to acknowledge, and shame washed over her in waves. "Jeannie?" She turned to find Melissa Clark approaching, clipboard in hand, wearing a headset and the harried expression of someone managing controlled chaos. "You're here early. Perfect. We'll need you stage-side in 20 minutes. The ceremony starts at 5 o'clock sharp." "I'll be ready," Jeannie said, though her voice sounded hollow. Melissa squeezed her arm briefly, a gesture of kindness that almost undid Jeannie completely. "You're going to be wonderful. Your voice is exactly what this ceremony needs." After Melissa hurried away, Jeannie pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes. She could still leave. She could walk out the staff entrance, disappear into Atlanta's evening traffic, and never look back. Brett would find another singer. The ceremony would continue. And she would lose $3,000 that meant survival. But more than that, she would lose something else, something she couldn't quite name. "Alice, you look absolutely radiant." Jeannie's eyes snapped open. Through a different doorway, one that led to the bridal suite, she could see Alice Grant in her wedding gown. The dress was a masterpiece of lace and silk, fitted perfectly to her slender frame, with a cathedral train that flowed behind her like sea foam. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant updo adorned with tiny crystals. Diamond earrings sparkled at her ears, probably an heirloom, probably worth more than Jeannie's entire apartment building. Alice looked like a princess from a fairy tale. But her hands were shaking. A bridesmaid, a blonde woman in a rose-colored gown, adjusted Alice's veil and spoke in a low, concerned voice. "Alice, are you okay? You seem tense." Alice's perfect smile faltered. She glanced toward the doorway as if checking for eavesdroppers, then lowered her voice. But the acoustics in the corridor carried sound perfectly, and Jeannie heard every word. "I don't know if I can explain it," Alice said softly. "Everything is perfect. The venue, the dress, the guests. But something feels wrong, like I'm performing in a play I didn't audition for." "Cold feet," the bridesmaid said reassuringly. "Every bride feels this way." "No." Alice's voice gained an edge of clarity. "It's Brett, the way he talks about today. It's all about the image, the statement, what people will think. He planned every detail like a business presentation." She paused, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Sometimes I think he loves control more than he loves." "Anything else?" The silence that followed felt heavy with truth. Jeannie's heart pounded. She should move away, give Alice privacy, but her feet wouldn't obey. Because hearing Alice voice the same fears, the same observations that had haunted Jeannie's own marriage, created a strange bond between them. Two women trapped in Brett Robinson's carefully constructed world. "Do you love him?" the bridesmaid asked gently. Alice's pause stretched too long. I think I love who he pretends to be." Before the bridesmaid could respond, another woman's voice called from inside the suite. "Alice, the photographer is ready for pre-ceremony portraits." Alice straightened her shoulders, and Jeannie watched her transform. The doubt vanished behind a radiant smile. The trembling hands steadied. Within seconds, Alice became the perfect bride again, poised, elegant, ready for her close-up. But Jeannie had seen the crack in the porcelain. She stumbled backward, pressing her hand against her mouth as emotions crashed through her. Alice didn't know. She suspected something was wrong, but she didn't know the truth. She didn't know that her groom had a pregnant ex-wife standing 30 feet away. She didn't know that the man she was about to marry had abandoned his own child because it didn't fit his image. Alice was walking into the same trap Jeannie had fallen into 15 months ago. Jeannie's vision blurred with tears. She turned toward the staff exit, her decision made. She couldn't do this. She couldn't stand on that stage and sing love songs while both she and Alice were being used as props in Brett's performance. It was too cruel, too wrong. Her hand was on the door handle when her phone vibrated. A text from Amira. "Remember who you are. Remember your voice. Don't let him take that from you. I love you, sis. Your baby loves you." Sing. Jeannie's hand fell away from the door. She turned slowly, looking back at the ballroom where chandeliers blazed and guests murmured, and Brett Robinson stood at the altar, waiting to claim another victory. Then she looked down at her rounded belly, where her baby kicked insistently, as if adding their own opinion to the debate. Amira's words echoed in her mind. "Don't let him take your voice." But there was something else now. Something that crystallized as she stood at the crossroads between running and staying. This wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't even just about Brett's cruelty or her survival. It was about Alice, who was about to promise forever to a man who saw her as an acquisition. It was about every woman who'd been reduced to decoration in someone else's story. It was about truth, and whether it deserved to be heard even when silence was easier. Jeannie pressed both hands against her belly and whispered, "This is for us, baby. This is for both of us." She straightened her midnight blue dress, lifted her chin, and walked toward the stage entrance. Behind her, the staff door swung shut with a soft click, sealing her inside with her decision. The ceremony was about to begin, and Jeannie Grant was about to change everything. The string quartet's opening notes filled the Grand Monarch Ballroom like the first drops of rain before a storm. 300 guests rose to their feet in a synchronized rustle of silk and wool. Cameras flashed like lightning. The massive doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and Alice Grant appeared in a spotlight, ethereal in her lace gown, her face glowing with the careful smile of a woman who'd spent months perfecting this moment. Jeannie watched from her position beside the stage, one hand resting on the grand piano, the other pressed protectively against her belly. Her baby had gone still, as if even the unborn child sensed the weight of what was coming. The processional began. Bridesmaids glided down the aisle in rose-colored gowns, their bouquets trembling slightly in their hands. Groomsmen followed, chests puffed with borrowed importance. Flash bulbs popped. Someone's grandmother dabbed at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. Then came Alice, walking alone. Her father had died 2 years ago, moving with practiced grace toward the altar where Brett Robinson waited. And Brett? Brett looked like a man who owned the world. His burgundy tuxedo was immaculate. His smile was wide and confident. He watched Alice approach with the satisfied expression of someone receiving exactly what they'd ordered. When Alice reached him, he took her hands with theatrical tenderness, playing to the cameras positioned at strategic angles throughout the ballroom. The guests settled back into their seats with satisfied sighs. This was what they'd come for: the spectacle, the romance, the image of perfection. The minister, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes, opened his Bible and began. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Jeannie barely heard the words. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands were cold, despite the warmth of the ballroom. The folder containing "Love Stayed" felt like it was burning through her dress. She still had time to change her mind. She could sing the approved song, "At Last," and collect her money and leave. No one would ever know about the choice she'd almost made. But then the minister's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. Marriage is built on truth, trust, and the courage to be vulnerable with another soul. Truth. The word hung in the air like an accusation. And now, the minister continued, the couple has requested a special musical performance. May we welcome our vocalist, Miss Jeannie Grant. The guests applauded politely, the brief, distracted applause reserved for vendors and staff. Jeannie felt every eye in the room slide over her, then away, dismissing her as background decoration. Except for Brett. Brett's eyes locked onto hers with unmistakable triumph. He whispered something to Alice that made her smile. Then he walked toward Jeannie with that confident swagger, his hand extended toward the microphone stand. When he reached her, he leaned close, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Let's hear that famous voice," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Earn your money, Jeannie." For a moment, she was back in their apartment 15 months ago, hearing him say she wasn't good enough, wasn't the right image, wasn't worth keeping. For a moment, she felt small and broken and powerless. Then her baby kicked, hard, insistent, demanding. Jeannie looked directly into Brett's eyes, her voice calm, but carrying an edge he'd never heard before. "You will," she said. Something flickered across his face, confusion, maybe a whisper of unease, but he was already turning back toward Alice, his smile reconstructed, his performance seamless. Jeannie stepped to the microphone. The ballroom fell silent, except for the soft rustle of expensive fabric and the clink of champagne flutes being set down in anticipation. She looked out at 300 faces, some curious, some bored, some already checking their phones. At the altar, Brett stood with his arm around Alice's waist, both of them posed like figures on a wedding cake. Alice's smile was radiant but brittle. Brett's smirk said, "See how far I've risen." Jeannie opened her folder. She placed the sheet music for At Last face down on the piano. Then she pulled out the handwritten pages of Love Stayed and positioned them where she could see them clearly. The pianist, a young woman who'd been hired for the ceremony, looked at Jeannie with confusion. These weren't the approved arrangements. "Follow me," Jeannie whispered. "Trust me." The pianist hesitated, then nodded slowly. Jeannie closed her eyes, placed both hands on her pregnant belly, and drew in a breath that reached all the way to the center of her soul. When she opened her eyes, she looked directly at Brett Robinson. Then she began to sing. The first notes were soft, almost tentative, a melody that hadn't existed in the world until 3 weeks ago, when pain and truth had demanded to be given form. The pianist, talented and intuitive, picked up the progression and followed. Jeannie's voice rose, filling the enormous ballroom with a sound that made people stop mid-conversation, stop checking their phones, stop breathing. "You left your truth to chase your crown, but love stayed when you let me down. You wanted gold, you wanted fame, but threw away what had no price, a heart that loved you without shame, a love that needed no disguise." Confusion rippled through the guests. Heads turned. Whispers began. This wasn't a wedding song. This was something else entirely. At the altar, Brett's smile had frozen into a grimace. Alice's face had gone pale. Jeannie's voice grew stronger, more powerful, as if every ounce of pain she'd swallowed for 8 months was transforming into pure, undeniable sound. "You left your child and called it freedom, but love stayed, in me and in him. You built your world on lies and pride, but truth sings louder than your name. You thought you won, but love survived. And I'm still standing, all the same." A gasp tore through the ballroom like a physical force. Guests turned to stare at Brett, whose face had drained of all color. Alice's hand flew to her mouth. Several people pulled out their phones, already recording. But Jeannie didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The song poured out of her like a wound finally allowed to bleed clean. Her voice cracked with emotion, but never wavered in strength. Tears streamed down her face, but she kept singing, her hands pressed against her belly, feeling her baby move beneath her palms. "You built a castle of lies and shame, but truth sings louder than your name. Love stayed, love stayed, love stayed." The final note hung in the air, raw, beautiful, devastating. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence that pressed down on the ballroom like snow falling on a cemetery. 300 people sat frozen in their seats. The minister's Bible had slipped from his hands. The photographer stood with her camera lowered, forgetting to shoot. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, caught in the gravity of what had just happened. Jeannie lowered the microphone slowly, her chest heaving, her face wet with tears, but her spine straight, her chin lifted. At the altar, Brett stood paralyzed, his carefully constructed mask completely shattered. Beside him, Alice had taken 3 steps backward, her bouquet falling forgotten to the floor, her eyes wide with dawning, terrible comprehension. Then, from the back of the ballroom, a single person began to clap. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, applause erupted, not the polite, restrained applause of high society, but something wild and cathartic and unstoppable. People rose to their feet. Some were crying. Some were staring at Brett with open disgust. Someone shouted, "Is it true?" Cameras flashed like a lightning storm. And Jeannie Grant, 7 months pregnant in her midnight blue dress, stood on that stage and felt, for the first time in 8 months, like she could finally breathe. The applause died as quickly as it had erupted, replaced by something more dangerous, the electric hum of 300 people realizing they'd witnessed something that would be talked about for years. Alice stood frozen at the altar, her lace train pooled around her feet like spilled milk. Her face had gone from porcelain pale to blotchy red, her chest rising and falling rapidly beneath the crystal-encrusted bodice. She stared at Brett with eyes that had been trusting 20 seconds ago and were now filling with something that looked like horror. "Alice," Brett started, his voice cracking on her name. "Is it true?" Alice's voice cut through the ballroom like glass breaking. She took a step toward him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Is it true? Baby, listen, you have to understand." Brett reached for her, but Alice jerked backward as if his touch would burn. "Don't call me that." Her voice shook, but carried to every corner of the enormous room. "Is she—" Alice's eyes found Jeannie, still standing beside the piano, and the question finished itself without words. Brett's mouth opened and closed. His carefully groomed facade was crumbling in real time, foundation cracking, false walls toppling. "It's not. It's complicated. She's making it seem—" "Answer me!" Alice's scream echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Several guests gasped. A woman in the 3rd row started crying. "Is that your child she's carrying?" The silence that followed felt like the world holding its breath. Brett's eyes darted around the ballroom, at the cameras pointed at him like weapons, at his groomsmen frozen in place, at his business partners and investors watching his social execution with the fascinated horror of people observing a car crash. "She was a mistake," he finally said, his voice desperate and ugly. "A phase. I ended it months ago. This has nothing to do with us, with our future." The slap echoed like a gunshot. Alice had moved faster than anyone expected, her palm connecting with Brett's cheek with enough force to snap his head sideways. Her diamond engagement ring caught the chandelier light as her hand fell. "A mistake?" Alice's voice was barely above a whisper now, but somehow more devastating than her scream. "You call a human being a mistake? You call your own child a phase?" Brett's hand went to his reddening cheek. "Alice, please, everyone's watching. Let's discuss this privately." "Privately?" Alice laughed, but it was a sound stripped of all joy. "You hired her." She pointed at Jeannie with a shaking hand. "You hired your pregnant ex-wife to sing at our wedding, and you want privacy?" "I didn't. That wasn't—" Brett looked wildly around for support, but his groomsmen had taken subtle steps backward, distancing themselves from the blast radius. Marcus, his college roommate, wouldn't meet his eyes. "Oh my God!" Alice's voice broke as understanding crashed over her in waves. "You did this on purpose. You hired her deliberately." Her hands flew to her mouth. "You wanted to humiliate her." "No, I wanted to show that I'd moved on, that she didn't matter." "That she didn't matter?" Alice's scream shattered what remained of the ballroom's shocked silence. "She's carrying your child. How does a child not matter?" Brett's face twisted with something ugly. That's not my responsibility. I offered to handle the situation. She refused. Handle the situation. Alice repeated the words like they were poison on her tongue. You mean you offered her money to get rid of your baby? The gasps from the audience were audible now. Someone said, "Oh my God." Another voice, older and full of disgust, "I can't believe this." Phones were everywhere now, held high, recording every moment. The reporters who'd been stationed outside had somehow made their way in and were filming with professional cameras. This wasn't just a private scandal anymore. This was going to be everywhere by nightfall. Alice reached up with trembling hands and pulled the veil from her perfectly styled hair. Crystals scattered across the marble floor like fallen tears. She held the delicate fabric for a moment, then let it drop. "You made me believe you loved me," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "You made me believe we were building something real. But you're not capable of love, are you, Brett? You're only capable of transactions." "Alice, don't do this. We can fix this." "We can fix this?" Alice yanked the 3-carat diamond engagement ring from her finger with such force that it left a red mark on her skin. "You humiliated her." She gestured toward Jeannie. "And you humiliated yourself. And you were about to make me part of your lie." She threw the ring at Brett's chest. It bounced off his burgundy tuxedo and clinked across the marble floor, coming to rest near the altar where moments ago they were supposed to have pledged forever to each other. "I am not marrying a man who abandons his own child," Alice said, her voice steady now, hardened with finality. "I am not marrying a man who treats human beings like they're disposable." She turned to the assembled guests, many of whom were openly crying now, others whispering frantically to their neighbors, all of them witnessing the most spectacular wedding implosion Atlanta society had ever seen. "I apologize for wasting your time," Alice said with devastating dignity, "but this wedding is over." Then she gathered her 10-foot train in her arms with surprising grace and walked down the aisle, not toward the exit, but toward Jeannie. The crowd parted instinctively as Alice approached the stage. Jeannie stood frozen, her folder of sheet music still clutched in her hands, tears streaming down her face. When Alice reached her, she stopped. Up close, Jeannie could see the mascara tracking down Alice's cheeks, the way her lips trembled, the absolute devastation in her eyes. "I'm sorry," Alice whispered. "I'm so sorry he did this to you." Jeannie shook her head, unable to speak. Alice glanced down at Jeannie's pregnant belly, and something soft and broken crossed her face. "You were so brave," she said quietly. "Thank you for saving me." Then Alice turned and walked toward the exit, her ruined wedding dress trailing behind her like the ghost of the future she'd just buried. Jeannie took a shaky breath and began moving toward the side exit, the one the staff used. She wanted to disappear, to slip away before anyone could stop her, before anyone could ask questions or take more pictures or demand explanations. But as she walked, something strange happened. People began to stand. Not everyone. Some of Brett's business associates stayed firmly seated, their faces tight with the calculation of how this scandal would affect their investments. But others rose. Women mostly, though some men too. They didn't applaud this time. They simply stood in silent acknowledgement. An older black woman in an emerald gown reached out as Jeannie passed and gently touched her arm. "God bless you, baby," she whispered. A younger woman, probably mid-30s, was openly crying. "You're so strong," she said, as Jeannie moved past her row. Another voice, "That took courage." And another, "You didn't deserve what he did to you." Jeannie's vision blurred with fresh tears, but she kept walking, one hand pressed against her belly, the other clutching her music folder like a shield. People parted around her like the Red Sea, creating a path. Behind her, she heard Brett's voice rising in desperate explanation, trying to spin the narrative, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. But his words sounded hollow and small in the enormous ballroom. Nobody was listening to him anymore. Jeannie reached the staff exit and pushed through the door into the service corridor. The heavy door closed behind her, muffling the chaos of the ballroom, the shouting, the whispers, the clicking of camera phones, the sound of Brett Robinson's perfect world collapsing. She leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly weak, her whole body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion, and something that felt impossibly like freedom. Her phone buzzed. A text from Amira, sent just seconds ago. "I'm outside. Car running. Let's go home, warrior." Jeannie smiled through her tears, pressed both hands against her belly where her baby was kicking wildly, and whispered, "We did it, little one. We sang our truth." Then she walked toward the exit, toward Amira's waiting car, toward whatever came next. Behind her, through the closed doors, she could still hear the fallout of the wedding that would be remembered not for its beauty, but for the moment truth crashed the ceremony and changed everything. By the time Amira pulled her car into the parking lot of Jeannie's apartment building, the video had already been uploaded to 17 different social media platforms. Jeannie didn't know this yet. She sat in the passenger seat with her head leaning against the window, watching Atlanta's streetlights blur past, her hands resting protectively on her belly. She felt hollowed out, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. It was the exhaustion of someone who'd finally set down a weight they'd been carrying for too long. "You okay?" Amira asked softly, pulling into a parking space. Jeannie nodded, though she wasn't sure if okay was the right word. "I think so." "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow." "Come on," Amira said, killing the engine. "Let's get you inside. You need to eat something and sleep for about 12 hours. They made their way up to Jeannie's small apartment, Amira supporting her friend's elbow as they climbed the stairs. Inside, Jeannie collapsed onto her worn sofa, while Amira disappeared into the kitchen to heat up leftovers. Jeannie's phone sat on the coffee table where she'd placed it, screen dark and silent. She'd turned off notifications during the drive home, unable to handle the constant buzzing that had started the moment she'd left the Grand Monarch Ballroom. "Jeannie," Amira called from the kitchen, her voice strange. "You need to see this." "I'm too tired." "No, sis. You really need to see this." Something in Amira's tone made Jeannie push herself up from the couch. She walked into the kitchen to find Amira staring at her phone, her eyes wide, her hand covering her mouth. "What is it?" Amira turned the phone around. The screen showed Twitter, or X as it was now called, and the trending topics section. At number 2, climbing rapidly toward number 1, was a hashtag #LoveStayed. Below it, a video thumbnail showed Jeannie standing beside the piano in her midnight blue dress, her hands on her pregnant belly, her mouth open in song. "Someone recorded it," Amira whispered. "Jeannie, someone recorded your performance and it's everywhere." Jeannie's legs felt weak. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs and took Amira's phone with trembling hands. She tapped the video. It started mid-song, probably filmed by a guest in the 3rd or 4th row. The video quality was surprisingly good. Someone had used a decent phone camera and held it steady. Jeannie's voice poured out of the small speaker, raw and powerful and achingly real. The video had been posted just 2 hours ago. It already had 3.2 million views. "Oh my God," Jeannie breathed. "Keep scrolling," Amira said. Jeannie scrolled. The video was everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, different angles, different perspectives, all capturing the same moment. Some videos showed Brett's face draining of color. Others focused on Alice's devastation. One showed the crowd's reaction as understanding rippled through the ballroom. But it was the comments that made Jeannie's hands shake. "This woman just turned pain into power." "I'm crying. This is the most beautiful act of truth-telling I've ever witnessed." She didn't just sing, she testified. She bore witness. This is what courage looks like. That man thought he could humiliate her, and she destroyed him with nothing but her voice and her truth. Every woman who's ever been discarded needs to watch this. The comments went on, thousands of them, then tens of thousands, pouring in from around the world. Jeannie set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. "This can't be real." "It's real," Amira said, her eyes shining with tears. "Jeannie, you're everywhere. You're trending in 15 countries." "I don't understand. I was just trying to survive." "You did more than survive, sis. You told the truth in a world that's starving for it." By midnight, major news networks had picked up the story. CNN ran a segment. "Wedding singer's viral performance exposes groom's abandonment of pregnant ex-wife." MSNBC featured a panel discussion about accountability and public shaming versus justice. Even international outlets covered it: BBC, Al Jazeera, news stations across Africa, Europe, Asia. The video transcended language barriers. Pain and truth needed no translation. Local Atlanta stations positioned themselves outside the Grand Monarch Ballroom, interviewing guests who'd witnessed the ceremony firsthand. "It was the most powerful thing I've ever seen," one woman said, still in her evening gown, mascara streaked down her face. She wasn't angry or vengeful. She was just honest, and that honesty destroyed him more effectively than any revenge could have. A man in his 60s, who identified himself as a wedding guest and business associate of Brett's, spoke more cautiously. "Look, I don't condone what Brett did, but was this the right forum, making a private matter public like that?" The reporter pressed him. "Sir, Brett Robinson deliberately hired his pregnant ex-wife to perform at his wedding. Wasn't he the one who made it public?" The man had no answer. Jeannie finally turned her phone back on at 1 a.m., unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. The notifications crashed over her like a tidal wave. Her Instagram, which had 847 followers that morning, now had over 200,000. Her DMs were flooded with messages, so many the app struggled to load them. She scrolled through, her heart pounding. Messages from women sharing their own stories of abandonment and survival. Messages from single mothers thanking her for giving voice to their experiences. Messages from domestic violence survivors saying her courage inspired them, but also messages from music producers in New York, Los Angeles, Nashville, record label executives, booking agents, radio programmers, all of them wanting to talk, to meet, to discuss opportunities. One message stood out from a verified account. "Jeannie, this is Alicia Key's management team. Alicia was deeply moved by your performance and would love to connect. Please contact us at your earliest convenience." Jeannie stared at the message until the words blurred. Another verified account. "Hello, Jeannie. I'm a producer at Good Morning America. We'd love to have you on the show to share your story. Would you be available this week?" And another. "Ms. Grant, I represent several major recording studios. Your voice is extraordinary, and your story is important. Let's talk about making an album." Jeannie set her phone down and pressed both hands against her face. This didn't feel real. 12 hours ago, she'd been a broke, struggling singer worried about paying her electric bill. Now the entire world knew her name. Her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. It was 1:30 a.m., but the caller ID said Melissa Clark, the wedding coordinator. Jeannie answered cautiously. "Hello? Jeannie?" Melissa's voice was tight, professional, but strained. "I'm calling to inform you that due to the events of this evening, we won't be able to provide the agreed-upon payment of $3,000. The wedding was not completed, and—" "I understand," Jeannie said quietly. She'd expected this. "However," Melissa continued, and her voice softened slightly, "I want you to know that what you did took incredible courage. My daughter was abandoned by her partner when she got pregnant. She's raising my grandson alone. When I showed her your video tonight, she cried for an hour. Then she said she felt less alone. So, thank you. Even if I can't say that professionally." The line went dead. Jeannie sat in the darkness of her apartment, processing this strange new reality. She'd lost the $3,000 that would have saved her, but she'd gained something she couldn't yet fully comprehend. By morning, Brett Robinson's world had completely collapsed. His company's website crashed from the traffic of people leaving negative reviews and canceling contracts. His Instagram account, once carefully curated with images of luxury events and inspirational quotes, was flooded with comments calling him a coward, a deadbeat, a disgrace. 3 major clients issued public statements terminating their relationships with his events company. His board of directors called an emergency meeting. 2 sponsors pulled out of his upcoming gala. The Atlanta Business Chronicle, which had featured him in their 40 Under 40 issue just 6 months ago, published a scathing editorial about accountability and character. Alice's family released a brief statement through their lawyer. "The Grant family has severed all ties with Brett Robinson. We support Alice completely and ask for privacy during this difficult time." By noon, #LoveStayed was the #1 trending topic worldwide. By evening, Jeannie's original performance video had been viewed over 30 million times, and in her small Southwest Atlanta apartment, Jeannie Grant sat on her worn sofa, her hands resting on her pregnant belly, reading messages from women around the world who were thanking her for being brave enough to sing her truth. "Look, baby," she whispered to her unborn child. "Sometimes when you think you've lost everything, the universe gives you exactly what you needed all along. Not money, not revenge, but your voice, and people who finally hear it." Her phone buzzed again. Another producer. Another opportunity, another person wanting to hear her story, her music, her voice. Jeannie smiled through fresh tears and began finally to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay after all. 3 weeks after the wedding that broke the internet, Jeannie Grant stood in a professional recording studio in Midtown Atlanta, headphones covering her ears, her 8-month pregnant belly pressing against the microphone stand. Through the glass, she could see the producer, a Grammy-winning engineer named Marcus Chen, who'd worked with everyone from Beyoncé to HER, watching her with intense focus. Behind him sat representatives from 3 different record labels who'd competed for the chance to record Love Stayed. Jeannie had chosen the smallest label, the one that promised her creative control, and understood that this song wasn't just music, it was testimony. "Whenever you're ready, Jeannie," Marcus's voice came through her headphones, warm and encouraging. She closed her eyes, placed one hand on her belly where her baby boy, she'd found out 2 weeks ago, kicked rhythmically as if keeping time. Then she began to sing. The studio version was different from the raw, emotional performance at Brett's wedding. This version had strings, cellos and violins that wept beneath her voice. This version had a gospel choir that came in on the final chorus like a congregation bearing witness. This version had production value and polish, but it still had truth. And truth, Jeannie had learned, was what people were starving for. When she finished the final take, Marcus came out of the booth with tears in his eyes. "That's it," he said simply. "That's the one. Jeannie, you just recorded something that's going to live forever." The single dropped on a Friday morning in early December. By Friday evening, it had hit #1 on iTunes. By Saturday, it was trending on every streaming platform. By Sunday, radio stations across the country were playing it on repeat, and DJs were calling it the most important song of the year. Love Stayed wasn't just a song anymore. It had become an anthem for single mothers, for abandoned women, for anyone who'd ever been discarded and told they didn't matter. The chorus became a rallying cry, shared in social media bios and protest signs and solidarity posts. Love stayed, love stayed, love stayed. The call from Good Morning America came on a Tuesday. "We'd love to have you perform live," the producer said. "Next week. National audience. Are you available?" Jeannie looked down at her belly, huge now, her baby boy due in less than a month. "I'm pretty pregnant," she said with a small laugh. "We know," the producer said warmly. "That's part of why this performance will be so powerful. Will you do it?" Jeannie thought of the girl she'd been 8 months ago, broke, scared, invisible. Then she thought of the woman she'd become, someone whose voice had reached millions, whose truth had sparked conversations, whose pain had transformed into power. "Yes," she said, "I'll do it." The morning of the performance, Jeannie stood backstage at the GMA studio in Times Square, her hands trembling slightly as a makeup artist applied the finishing touches. Through the monitor, she could see the crowd gathered outside, hundreds of people holding signs that read, "We love you, Jeannie," and "Love Stayed," and "Thank you for your courage." Amira stood beside her, squeezing her hand. "You ready, sis?" "I think so," Jeannie whispered. "This is so different from that small jazz lounge where this all started." "You were always meant for this," Amira said fiercely. "The world just needed to catch up to what I already knew, that you're extraordinary." The stage manager gave the signal. 2 minutes, Ms. Grant." Jeannie walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The studio audience rose to their feet. Through the windows, she could see the crowd outside erupting, their signs waving, their phones held high to capture the moment. Robin Roberts, the host, greeted her with a warm hug. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Jeannie admitted with a genuine smile. "And about 8.5 months pregnant." The audience laughed affectionately. "Well, we're honored to have you," Robin said. "Ladies and gentlemen, performing her #1 single, Love Stayed, Jeannie Grant." The studio lights dimmed. A single spotlight illuminated Jeannie standing center stage, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. Her natural hair styled in elegant twists, wearing a flowing emerald gown that made her look like royalty. She didn't need to close her eyes this time. She sang directly to the camera, directly to every person who'd ever felt discarded or diminished, or told they weren't enough. Her voice filled the studio, no longer carrying pain, but power, no longer weighted with shame, but lifted by truth. When she reached the final chorus, something magical happened. The studio audience began singing with her, their voices joining hers in a chorus of solidarity and healing. "You built your world on lies and shame, but truth sings louder than your name. Love stayed, love stayed, love stayed." By the time the final note faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Robin Roberts was crying openly. The cameramen were wiping their faces. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers so loud they could be heard through the soundproof glass. Brett Robinson's attempts to contact Jeannie became increasingly desperate as the weeks passed. He called from different numbers, his personal phone, office line, numbers she didn't recognize. She blocked every single one. He sent emails that grew progressively more pathetic. "We need to talk. You're destroying my life. I'm sorry, can we please discuss this?" She deleted them without reading past the first line. He even tried to reach out through Melissa, the wedding coordinator, who called Jeannie personally to deliver the message, and then added, "For what it's worth, I told him you'd moved on to bigger and better things, which is the truth." Jeannie never responded to Brett, not once. She understood now that some people didn't deserve her words, her time, or her forgiveness. Some people had made their choices and would have to live with the consequences. Brett Robinson had chosen his image over their child. Now he would spend the rest of his life watching that child grow up from a distance, if at all, knowing he'd traded something priceless for something worthless. That was punishment enough. Alice Grant divorced Brett quietly 6 weeks after the wedding that never was. There were no public statements, no dramatic revelations, just paperwork filed through lawyers and a brief notice in the legal section of the newspaper. Alice's family's money ensured discretion. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Jeannie received a letter, actual paper, addressed in elegant handwriting, delivered to her apartment. "Dear Jeannie, I hope this letter finds you well and healthy as you prepare for your baby's arrival. I wanted to reach out privately to thank you for your courage that day. You saved me from making a terrible mistake, and though the method was painful, I'm grateful. I've spent these past months in therapy, working to understand how I ignored so many warning signs. You were braver than I was. You told the truth when I was still trying to pretend everything was fine. I'm enclosing a check. It's the $3,000 you should have been paid for your performance. You earned it, and more. I hope it helps as you prepare for your son. I wish you and your baby every happiness. You both deserve a beautiful life." With respect and gratitude, Alice Jeannie cried when she read the letter. Then she deposited the check and used it to buy a crib, a changing table, and everything else her baby boy would need. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, Jeannie Grant gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Isaiah, which meant salvation of God, because that's what he represented to her. Salvation from despair, salvation from believing she wasn't enough, salvation through love that stayed when everything else fell away. In the hospital room, with Amira sitting beside her bed and winter sunlight streaming through the windows, Jeannie held her son for the first time. He was perfect. Tiny fingers, dark, downy hair, eyes that would someday see a world she'd help create for him. She began to sing softly, the same song that had changed everything, but now transformed into a lullaby. Love stayed when the world said go. Love stayed through the pain and woe. Love stayed, little one, you'll know. Love stayed, love stayed, love stayed. Isaiah's eyes fluttered closed, peaceful and safe. "You were born from pain," Jeannie whispered, her lips pressed against his forehead. "But you'll grow in love, because love, my sweet boy, love always stays." 6 months later. The Apollo Theater in Harlem was sold out. Every seat filled with people who'd come to witness Jeannie Grant's first major headlining performance since Isaiah's birth. The historic venue, which had launched the careers of legends from Ella Fitzgerald to Lauryn Hill, now prepared to add Jeannie's name to its storied legacy. Backstage, Jeannie adjusted her outfit, a stunning gold gown that made her look like light personified, while Amira held 6-month-old Isaiah, who gurgled happily and grabbed at his auntie's earrings. "You ready to make history?" Amira asked with a grin. Jeannie looked at her son, at her best friend, at the dressing room mirror reflecting a woman who'd survived everything meant to destroy her and emerged stronger. "I already did," she said softly. "This is just the encore." The stage manager appeared. "Ms. Grant, you're on." Jeannie kissed Isaiah's forehead, squeezed Amira's hand, and walked toward the stage. The roar of the crowd grew louder with each step, thousands of voices calling her name, celebrating her survival, bearing witness to her triumph. The lights hit her as she stepped onto the Apollo stage. The crowd erupted, standing ovation before she'd sung a single note. Jeannie Grant stood in the spotlight, microphone in hand, and smiled. Not the careful, protective smile of someone trying to hide pain, but the genuine, radiant smile of someone who'd found their voice and refused to ever silence it again. "Good evening," she said, her voice strong and clear. "My name is Jeannie Grant, and this is a song about what happens when love stays." The first notes filled the legendary theater, and Jeannie sang, not for revenge, not for vindication, but for every person who'd ever been told they didn't matter and chose to believe differently. She sang for the woman she'd been. She sang for the mother she'd become. She sang for her son sleeping peacefully backstage. She sang for everyone who needed to hear that truth was stronger than lies, that courage was stronger than cruelty, and that love, real, honest, unshakable love, always stayed. The spotlight blazed, the crowd sang with her, and Jeannie Grant, the woman who'd turned humiliation into history, who'd transformed pain into power, who'd proven that the voice meant to be silenced could become the one the whole world heard. She sang on. The end. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as hopeful and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.